The warning came too late for New Brighton Colony. Captain Maya Chen stood in the remains of what had been the colony's central plaza, her boots sinking into mud still wet with blood. 3 days after the attack, and the stench of death lingered, mixing with the metallic tang of Terran rain on the alien soil. The colony's defense forces had managed to drive off the creatures, but at a terrible cost. 47 dead, including 12 children who had been playing in the schoolyard when the first of the beasts emerged from the tree line. "Captain, you need to see this," called Lieutenant Rodriguez, waving her over to a massive corpse partially covered by debris. The creature was unlike anything in humanity's xenobiological catalog. 8 limbs arranged radially around a central mass, each ending in hooked talons that could rend steel. Its skin was a mottled purple-black exoskeleton, punctuated by sensory organs that resembled crystalline structures. Most disturbing was its mouth, a spiraling pit of serrated teeth that continued deep into its core. "That's the 5th one we found," Rodriguez said, keeping his distance despite the creature's obvious death. "Science team is calling them Mortons. They're not native to this planet." "No," Chen agreed, kneeling to examine the beast without touching it. "They were sent." For 3 years, humanity had been expanding beyond their initial colonial clusters, pushing further into the sector designated Orion Cygnus. The United Earth Alliance had established 27 colonies across 14 systems, building a fragile network of human outposts in a vast, seemingly empty region of space, until 2 months ago, when the first signs of another spacefaring civilization appeared. The Vicari arrived without warning or introduction. Immense ships of unknown configuration that took position at the edges of populated systems. Initial attempts at communication had been met with silence. Then, without declaration or demand, the attacks began. Not with weapons or soldiers, but with these, the Mortons. "Command just sent word," Rodriguez continued. "It wasn't just us. 3 other colonies hit simultaneously. Horizon Colony is still fighting them off." Chen's comm unit buzzed. "Captain, this is Horizon Colony Defense. We're requesting immediate reinforcement. These things air." Static interrupted before the transmission cut completely. "Get the team ready," Chen ordered. "We leave in 10. Dr. Elena Reyes had been studying xenobiology for 15 years, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what now surrounded Horizon Colony. The settlement's outer perimeter was besieged by at least 30 Mortons, their massive forms prowling just beyond the hastily constructed barricades. Unlike natural predators, they didn't retreat when met with heavy resistance. They seemed to operate with a hive-like coordination, probing defenses, testing for weaknesses. "They're not just animals," she muttered, reviewing footage from surveillance drones. "Look at their attack patterns. They're being directed." Colonel Wei, the colony's military commander, barely glanced up from the defensive schematic. "Directed or not, they're breaking through the western perimeter. We've lost contact with Agricultural District 3. These aren't natural predators," Rice insisted. "Their biology is too specialized, too engineered. Someone made these to hunt humans specifically." "The Vicari," Wei nodded. "Their ships haven't moved, but our long-range sensors detected multiple pod launches before the attacks began." Reyes frowned, studying the creature's movements on the monitors. "But why use bioweapons, if they have the technology to cross interstellar space?" A massive explosion rocked the command center as a section of wall collapsed. Through the breach poured 3 Mortons, their crystalline sensory organs glowing with an internal light. "Fall back," Wei shouted, drawing his pulse rifle and firing at the lid creature. The energy bolt scorched its exoskeleton, but failed to penetrate deeply enough to cause serious damage. Reyes grabbed her research tablet and ran toward the inner compartment, but found her path blocked by a 4th Morton that had circled around. The creature reared up, its front limbs poised to strike. Reyes froze, knowing any sudden movement would trigger an attack. What happened next would change the course of humanity's response to the Vicari invasion. As the Morton tensed to lunge, A single colonist stepped between Reyes and the creature. Marcus Okafor, the colony's agricultural specialist, stood with nothing but a livestock prod in his hands. "Easy now," he said, his voice steady despite the terror that must have filled him. "Easy." To everyone's shock, the mordant hesitated. Its sensory crystals flickered in a pattern Reyes hadn't observed before. Okafor took a step forward, the prod held low and non-threateningly. "You're just hungry, aren't you? Looking for something." The creature's central mass pulsed, and it lowered its front limbs slightly. "Marcus, don't move," Wei hissed, trying to get a clear shot. But Okafor continued forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "I spent 20 years working with dangerous predators on Earth's preservation zones. Lions, tigers, bears. Learned one thing. Most predators don't want to fight if they can avoid it." "That's not a natural predator," Reyes whispered. "No," Okafor agreed, "but whoever made it used a template, and I think I know which one." With a motion so casual it seemed suicidal, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ration bar. He broke off a piece and tossed it gently toward the mordant. The creature's sensory crystals flashed rapidly, and one limb darted out to snatch the food. "Their hunting pattern," Okafor said quietly, "reminds me of the Arctic wolf packs we reintroduced to northern Canada. They probe, they test, they communicate, but they're also smart enough to recognize when violence isn't necessary." He broke off another piece, this time holding it out. "Whoever made you," he said to the mordant, didn't understand what they were copying. To the astonishment of everyone in the command center, the creature extended a limb delicately and took the food from Okafor's hand. 3 days later, Captain Chen's transport arrived at Horizon Colony to find a situation unlike anything she could have imagined. The colony's outer perimeter had been expanded rather than contracted, and workers moved freely in areas that should have been combat zones. "Welcome to Horizon, Captain," Reyes greeted her at the landing pad. "I think we found our solution to the mordant problem." Chen followed Reyes through the colony, barely containing her shock when they entered what had once been the livestock processing area. Inside, a dozen mordants moved about, some carrying building materials, others helping to repair damaged structures. Most surprising was a particularly large specimen that appeared to be playing a simple game with colony children, gently pushing a ball back to them with one of its limbs. "What the hell am I looking at, Doctor?" Chen demanded. "We're calling this one Spike," Reyes explained, gesturing to the mordant with the children. Marcus Okafor was the first to recognize that the mordants aren't mindless killing machines. They're highly intelligent pack hunters based on Earth-Canid templates, but enhanced with problem-solving capabilities. The Vekari engineered them to hunt us, but they miscalculated something fundamental. "Which is?" Reyes smiled. "Humans have been domesticating pack predators for over 30,000 years. The wolf became the dog because we understood each other. The mordants operate on similar enough principles that we can communicate with them, establish trust. You're telling me you've tamed these things in 3 days?" "Not exactly tamed," Okafor said, joining them. The large mordant, Spike, abandoned its game and moved to Okafor's side, its sensory crystals glowing a calm blue. "More like we've established mutual respect. The Vekari control them through fear and pain. We offered food, safety, and companionship." Chen stared at the creature that had, days earlier, been tearing humans apart. "And they just switched sides." "They never had a side," Reyes explained. "The Vekari treated them as tools. We're treating them as potential partners." A distant alarm sounded, and Spike's crystals flared red. Okafor placed a hand on one of the creature's limbs. "Vekari ships are launching more pods," he explained. "But this time, we're ready for them." Chen watched as colonists and mordants moved together toward the perimeter, no longer enemies but allies preparing to face a common threat. "The Vekari thought they knew human weakness," Reyes said quietly. "They never considered that our greatest strength is turning enemies into friends." As they reached the colony's edge, they saw the sky darkening with dozens of entry pods, far more than the previous attack. But these pods were different, larger, and the heat signatures suggested something much bigger was coming. "The Valkyrie aren't stupid," Wei said, joining them at the observation post. "They'll have realized their first wave failed. These won't be Mordants." The first pod impacted 2 kilometers from the perimeter, its metal shell splitting open to reveal a monstrosity that dwarfed the Mordants. 12 meters tall, with armored plates covering its hulking form and multiple weapon-like appendages, it rose from the impact crater with a roar that shook the ground. "Behemoths," Rise whispered, scanning the creature with her instruments. "Completely different design. I don't think our Mordant approach will work on these." Beside her, Spike and the other converted Mordants bristled, their crystals pulsing with what seemed like fear. "Maybe not," Okafor said, watching more pods land across the valley. "But if the Valkyrie think humanity will cower before bigger monsters, they haven't been paying attention to our history." Chen unholstered her rifle, watching as the massive behemoth began its lumbering approach toward the colony. "Recommendations?" Okafor looked at Spike, then at the advancing behemoth. "I have an idea, but it's going to sound crazy." At this point, Chen replied, "I'm open to crazy." As more behemoths emerged from their landing pods, the residents of Horizon Colony prepared for a battle unlike any humanity had faced before, alongside allies they couldn't have imagined days earlier. The Valkyrie had sent their monsters to exterminate humanity. They were about to learn that humans had been taming monsters since before they built their first cities. The first behemoth reached the outer perimeter of Horizon Colony just as the emergency council meeting broke up. Captain Chen watched the massive creature tear through reinforced barriers like they were made of paper. Its armored hide deflected pulse rifle fire without so much as a scorch mark. "This plan of yours better work," Chen said to Okafor, who was finishing preparations with Spike and 3 other Mordants. "Theoretically, it should," Okafor replied, securing what looked like modified mining equipment to Spike's central mass. "The behemoths may be bigger, but they're still based on familiar biological principles, and they still have a nervous system." Dr. Rice approached, carrying the case of hypodermics filled with a luminescent blue substance. "The neural inhibitor is ready. We've synthesized enough for 20 injections, but each Mordant can only carry 5. The needle has to penetrate right at the junction between the armored plates." "And you're sure the Mordants understand the target locations?" Chen asked, watching as Spike's crystalline sensory organs pulsed with a pattern she was beginning to recognize as attentiveness. "They don't just understand," Rice said with a hint of wonder. "They're improving the plan. Watch." She displayed a tactical schematic on her tablet. The original attack pattern called for a frontal assault, with the Mordants attempting to dart between the behemoth's massive legs to reach vulnerable points. But Spike had used its limb to trace a different approach, a coordinated attack from multiple angles, utilizing the behemoth's limited field of vision. "They're pack hunters," Okafor explained. "This is how they take down larger prey in the wild. The Valkyrie engineered them from Earth templates, but didn't fully understand what they were creating." A tremendous crash from the perimeter cut their conversation short. The first behemoth had breached the main gate, and 2 more were visible on the horizon. "It's now or never," Chen said. Okafor nodded and turned to the Mordants. "Ready?" Spike's crystals flashed a brilliant blue, and it rose to its full height, nearly 4 meters tall when fully extended. The other 3 Mordants formed a loose semicircle behind it. "They're ready," Okafor confirmed. "And so am I." Chen raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" In answer, Okafor pulled himself onto Spike's back, settling into a makeshift harness he'd fashioned between the creature's sensory clusters. "You're not seriously," Chen began. "The neural inhibitor has to be placed precisely," Okafor cut her off. "I've spent my life working with predators, Captain. This is what I do." Before Chen could object further, Spike let out a high-pitched whistling sound that was echoed by the other Mordants. As one, they surged forward toward the approaching behemoth. The battle for Horizon Colony would later be remembered as the turning point in humanity's response to the Vakari invasion. From observation posts around the settlement's perimeter, colonists watched in amazement as the Mordants executed their coordinated attack. Spike, with Okafor on its back, circled wide to approach the first behemoth from behind. The other Mordants darted between the creature's legs, their crystalline organs flashing in patterns that seemed to confuse and distract it. The behemoth roared, swinging massive limbs at targets that moved too quickly to hit. From his position on Spike's back, Okafor directed their approach with gentle pressure and verbal commands. When the behemoth turned to focus on two Mordants at its front, Spike launched itself onto the creature's back. Okafor clung to his harness with one hand while the other drove the hypodermic filled with neural inhibitor into the precise junction between armored plates at the base of the behemoth's neck. The effect was nearly instantaneous. The massive creature stiffened, its movements becoming uncoordinated. It took 2 stumbling steps forward, then collapsed with an impact that shook the ground. It wasn't dead. The inhibitor was designed to immobilize, not kill, but it was effectively neutralized. First one down, Chen reported through the comms. But we've got 5 more incoming. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as colony defenders coordinated with their new Mordant allies. Not all attempts were successful. One Mordant was caught by a behemoth's serrated limb and thrown against the colony wall with bone-crushing force. But for each defender lost, a behemoth was brought down. By nightfall, the outskirts of Horizon Colony resembled a bizarre sculpture garden of immobilized behemoths. 11 of the massive creatures lay paralyzed at various points around the perimeter, while only 3 had been neutralized by conventional weapons. The cost had been high. 14 colonists dead, 7 Mordants lost. But the colony stood. "We need to take this to the next level," Chen said during the emergency council meeting that night. "Defense isn't enough. The Vakari will just keep sending more beasts, each one deadlier than the last." "What are you suggesting?" Colonel Wei asked, his uniform still stained with blood from the day's fighting. "We need to take the fight to them," Chen replied. "Their ships are still in orbit. They're directing these attacks from there." Rai shook her head. "Our ships are no match for Vakari vessels, and even if we could reach them, we don't have weapons capable of penetrating their hulls." "We don't need to destroy their ships," Chen said quietly. "We just need to get aboard them." All eyes turned to Okafor, who sat with Spike resting beside his chair, its sensory crystals glowing a dim blue in the low light. "You think the Mordants can get us onto Vakari ships?" Wei asked skeptically. "Not exactly," Chen clarified. "But the Vakari are still retrieving their surviving behemoths after each attack. They send down transport pods to collect them. If we could disguise a team inside a seemingly disabled behemoth." "A Trojan horse," Rise whispered. "It's insane, but it might work." 2 days later, Commander Tariq Hassan surveyed his unusual strike team. 6 soldiers including himself, all volunteers, all aware of the mission's likely one-way nature. Alongside them, 4 Mordants including Spike, whose intelligence and adaptability had proven invaluable. And completing the team was Dr. Reyes, whose understanding of Vakari biology might be the difference between success and failure. "The transport pod descends in 30 minutes, Hassan briefed them. "Once inside, we'll have approximately 12 minutes before the pod docks with the Vakari command vessel. When the retrieval bay opens, Spike will leave the Mordants out first, creating confusion. We follow, secure the bay, and move to the ship's neural control center." "And if we encounter Vakari?" asked Specialist Zhang, checking her modified pulse rifle. Dr. Reyes held up a hypospray. "The same neural inhibitor we used on the behemoths should work on Vakari physiology. Their nervous system is similar enough based on tissue samples we've recovered. Non-lethal, but effective." "Any questions?" Hassan asked. When none came, he led the team to their position inside the hollowed-out corpse of a behemoth. The creature had been killed during the previous day's attack, its internal organs partially removed to create a cramped but serviceable hiding space. The smell was horrific, but none complained. "Retrieval pod on approach." Chen's voice came through their earpieces. "Good luck, Commander." The wait seemed interminable, but finally they felt the jarring impact as the Vicari retrieval pod enveloped the behemoth carcass. Machinery whirred as the pod lifted off, carrying them toward the Vicari command vessel. 10 minutes to docking, Hassan whispered. The mission had begun. The first Vicari that Specialist Zhang saw in person was nothing like the monstrous creatures she had imagined. Standing just over 2 meters tall, its body was slender and almost delicate, covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with movement. Multiple eyes, she counted 6, were arranged in a semicircle around what appeared to be a sensory cluster. It had 4 arms, each ending in 7-fingered hands currently operating retrieval equipment. It didn't appear threatening, until it turned and saw Spike emerging from the behemoth carcass. The Vicari's scales flashed a brilliant crimson, and it emitted a high-pitched sound that seemed to be an alarm. It reached for something at its belt, but Zhang was faster. Her modified pulse rifle fired a neural inhibitor dart that struck the Vicari in the center of its chest. The alien stiffened, then collapsed. "Move," Hassan ordered as more alarm sounds echoed through the retrieval bay. Spike and the other Mordants surged forward, their crystalline organs pulsing with rapid patterns. 3 more Vicari entered the bay, only to retreat in obvious terror at the sight of the approaching Mordants. "They're afraid of them," Rives observed, scanning the fallen Vicari with her instruments. "Look at the hormone levels in this one. Pure fear response." "They should be afraid of their own weapons," Zhang muttered. The team moved deeper into the Vicari vessel, following a path Rives had extrapolated from partial scans. The ship's interior was unexpectedly organic, with corridors that seemed to pulse with an internal light and surfaces that rippled at their touch. They encountered sporadic resistance, mostly Vicari technicians who fled rather than fought. Those who did stand their ground were quickly neutralized by inhibitor darts. "Neural control center should be through here," Rice said, indicating a membranous barrier that blocked the corridor ahead. Hassan nodded to Spike, who extended a limb and carefully sliced through the barrier. Beyond lay a vast chamber filled with what appeared to be suspended globes of liquid, each containing a pulsing mass of neural tissue. "My God," Rice breathed. "They're controlling the behemoths directly, brain to brain." A dozen Vicari worked at consoles surrounding the globes. At the center of the chamber stood a larger Vicari, its scales a deep purple, wearing what appeared to be ceremonial armor. "The commander," Hassan whispered. Before they could formulate a plan, the Vicari commander turned and addressed them directly, in perfect English. "Humans," it said, its voice surprisingly melodic. "You have surprised us yet again." Hassan stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Your attacks on our colonies end now." The Vicari commander's scales shifted to a pattern of blue and green. "Perhaps they should. You are not what we expected." "What did you expect?" Rice asked, stepping up beside Hassan. "Primitives. Animals," the commander replied. "Species without sensitivity or intelligence worthy of consideration. Our probes observe your destructive tendencies toward your own planet, your own kind. We deemed you a threat to galactic stability. So you sent monsters to slaughter us," Zhang spat. "We sent instruments of cleansing," the commander corrected. "Controlled, directed, precise." Its scales flickered. "But you turned them against us. In 15,000 cycles, no species has done this." Spike moved forward until it stood directly before the Vicari commander. Its crystalline organs pulsed in a complex pattern. To everyone's surprise, the commander responded with a gesture that seemed almost like respect. "You did not just control them," it said to Hassan. "You formed bonds with them. Even now, this one protects you." It turned to Reyes. "How is this possible?" "Because we understand something you don't," Reyes replied. "Life. All life. seeks connection. Your instruments aren't just weapons. They're sentient beings. You forced them to kill for you. We gave them a choice. The Vicary commander was silent for a long moment, its scales shifting through a range of colors. Finally, it spoke again. Perhaps we have made an error in judgment. The agreement that ended the Vicary-human conflict would later be known as the Horizon Accord, named after the colony where humanity first demonstrated its unique approach to interspecies relations. The terms were simple. The Vicary would withdraw their bioweapons from all human colonies and recognize humanity's right to exist within the sector. In return, humans would share their understanding of what the Vicary came to call cooperative symbiosis, the ability to form relationships with other species based on mutual benefit rather than control. 6 months after the Battle of Horizon Colony, Captain Chen stood on the observation deck of the United Earth Alliance diplomatic vessel Concordia, watching as a mixed team of humans and Mordants conducted training exercises with Vicary observers. Still hard to believe, Colonel Wei said, joining her at the viewport. Which part? Chen asked. That we turned the Vicary's weapons against them, or that we're now teaching them how to make friends. Wei chuckled. Both, I suppose. Though I'm not sure everyone back home is comfortable with how quickly the Alliance embraced reconciliation. They weren't there, Chen replied simply. They didn't see what happened on that Vicary ship. What had happened, according to Commander Hassan's official report, was nothing short of a paradigm shift. The Vicary, despite their advanced technology, had evolved on a world where dominance rather than cooperation was the primary survival strategy. They had never domesticated animals, never formed symbiotic relationships with other species. The concept was so alien to them that they couldn't comprehend humanity's approach until they witnessed it firsthand. Dr. Rice thinks they're genuinely interested in learning, Chen added, watching as Spike demonstrated a complex maneuver for a group of Vicary scientists. She says their neural structure makes them capable of empathy, but their evolutionary history never required them to develop it. And now we're teaching apex predators from another world how to play nice, Wei said with a shake of his head. Only humans would try something so crazy. And succeed, Chen reminded him. Below them, a young Vicary approached Spike cautiously, extending all 4 hands in what had become the standard greeting. The Mordant's crystalline organs pulsed a welcoming blue, and it extended a limb in return. Nearby, Okafor watched with obvious pride. They sent their monsters to destroy us, Chen said softly. We didn't just survive, we made those monsters part of our family. That's humanity's superpower. That, and sheer stubbornness, Wei added with a smile. Chen laughed. That too. As the Concordia prepared to depart for the next diplomatic mission, Chen couldn't help but wonder what other species might be watching humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The Vicary wouldn't be the last to underestimate them, to view humans as primitive or dangerous. But perhaps they would be the last to make the mistake of sending monsters against a species that had been taming the wild since the dawn of their civilization. After all, the Vicary had learned what any species threatening humanity would eventually discover. You can send your monsters to destroy us, but don't be surprised when we send them back as friends.